Hi, I'm Lorene. My sister's husband made a bet, with my own husband, that I'd cry when they served me divorce papers at Christmas dinner. But what if I told you that wasn't even the worst part? The worst part was how long I smiled through it all. How I handed over trust, inch by inch, until one day I realized I had signed away everything but my silence. They moved money behind my back, erased my name from photos, called me the adopted one. In whispers they thought I couldn't hear. And when I finally spoke, it wasn't to scream. It was to hand them a box, wrapped, elegant, and full of proof. Now tell me, if you were me, would you have cried? Or would you have done what I did? The sun was just beginning to dip behind the oaks, lining the edge of Isolde's backyard when I pulled up. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the neck of the wine bottle nestled beside me like it might offer strength. Pinot Noir, Dad's favorite. I'd spent the morning hunting down the exact label he used to toast with after Sunday dinners. It felt like something, a gesture, a reminder. Inside, laughter rang out, full and familiar. The sound of children weaving between patio chairs, the clink of glass against glass, the well-oiled hum of a family that functioned, as long as no one looked too closely. I stepped onto the flagstone with my practiced smile, my arms full, the wine, a gift bag, and a heart already rehearsing how to stay small. Isolde caught sight of me first, her face lifted in that polished way she wore at every gathering, effortless grace, curated warmth. "You made it," she said, already turning before I could respond. Dexler was behind her, sleeves rolled up, holding a grill tong like a trophy. "You look rested," he said, lips twisting into what I think was supposed to be a compliment. "Didn't expect to see you solo tonight. Alden tied up or just done?" I smiled without letting it reach my eyes. "Work call. He's coming later." Dexler leaned closer, his voice lower now. "You know, women like you, pretty, quiet, compliant, always end up divorced or tired." There it was, that slippery cruelty wrapped in charm. I laughed lightly, as if I hadn't felt the heat behind my ribs twist just a little. "Good thing I'm not that quiet," I said, moving past him. But his words stayed. They clung to me like humidity in July, invisible and oppressive. Dinner moved along with its usual choreography, Isolde managing the flow of conversation like a seasoned conductor. Dad was in his best polo, cheeks flushed from wine. Mom kept refolding her napkin like it was misbehaving. Everyone was at ease, well fed on familiarity. When the cake was brought out, I slipped away for a second. I'd placed the gift, an old camera Dad used to carry, now restored and wrapped, on the present table earlier that evening. It was meant to be a quiet nod to memory, something only he and I would really understand. But as he unwrapped it, Isolde's voice rang out. "I thought you'd love it, Dad. Found it through a vintage refurbisher in Oregon." He beamed. "Isolde, this is incredible. Brings back every camping trip we ever took." I froze. The smile stayed on my lips, but it hollowed out quickly. "Oh," I said softly, to no one, just to the air. Isolde didn't look at me. She didn't need to. She knew what she'd done, and no one noticed the way I didn't eat my cake, the way my fingers curled under the table, quietly tapping the wood in perfect rhythm to my restraint. Later, I helped carry a few dishes back inside. The kitchen was empty, save for Dexler sipping whiskey near the sink. He glanced at me. "You should talk to Alden about that prenup stuff sometime. Just in case. You never know what people are planning." I didn't blink. "You mean like when someone gives away your gift as their own?" He smirked. "Touché." I left before anyone else. Slipped out with a wave, no one returned. The Pinot Noir sat untouched in my passenger seat, like an unaccepted apology. I drove home with the windows down and the radio off. "You ever realize someone's been writing you out of the story in real time?" I whispered to no one, because by then, I'd already started drafting my own. At a red light, I checked my phone. One message. From Alden. "Did you cry yet?" I stared at it. It wasn't for me. That message was meant for someone else. Maybe Dexler, Maybe Nate. Maybe whoever else Alden had decided to play audience with tonight. My thumb hovered over reply. I imagined writing something clever, cruel, cutting. Instead, I locked the screen, let the quiet swallow the urge, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't cry. I didn't answer Alden's text. I didn't even open the thread again. Instead, I accepted the brunch invite that came a few days later, like a performance note passed under a stage door. Cordial, scripted, obligatory. Just family, Isolde had said. Low-key. So I baked scones from scratch. Not because I cared about making an impression, but because it's what you do when you've been raised to show up gracious, even when you know you're not really invited to stay long. When I arrived, the backyard already hummed with curated ease. Napkins folded just so, pitchers of mimosa glinting in the sun. Dexler stood at the grill, flipping sausages like it was a contest. Isolde floated between conversations like she was auditioning for a lifestyle segment. I placed the scones near the fruit tray, greeted my parents, smiled at cousins I barely recognized anymore. Everyone seemed a little too engaged, a little too choreographed. The laughter felt rehearsed, like they'd already had the real fun before I got there. Alden wasn't by my side. Not that I expected him to be. He'd arrived earlier, apparently. Claimed he had to help Dexler set up the sound system. I spotted them inside, through the window, huddled near the living room TV. A football game played in the background, but they weren't watching. I excused myself to refresh the lemonade. The pitcher was heavy and sweating. As I reached for the fridge door, I heard it, just under the crowd noise. Bet she'll cry if I serve her papers at brunch, Alden said, chuckling. Dexler responded with that low, nasal laugh I've come to associate with cruelty and business casual. That'd be classic. She'd probably do it all quiet and noble, too. Real Oscar-worthy. The pitcher in my hand shifted. Not enough to spill, but enough to make the ice clink in warning. I stood there, completely still, like I was listening to wildlife rustle near my tent, waiting for it to pass. They were practicing my pain like it was a punchline. I backed away slowly, left the lemonade on the counter, walked outside before anyone could see what my face was doing. Later, I found myself clearing plates near the patio. My mother-in-law stood with one of her friends, laughing gently over a glass of Prosecco. They didn't notice me behind the ficus plant. I've always said, she murmured, she's more like the adopted one, so different from our Isolde. Not that she's not lovely, of course, just different. Her voice dipped on the last word, like it carried more weight than she could say aloud. I didn't interrupt. I just took another plate from the table and carried it inside, like nothing stung. But it did. Not in the sharp, sudden way pain sometimes stabs. This was deeper. Like hearing a door click shut behind you in a hallway you thought led home. By the time the event wound down, the scones were gone, the chairs stacked, and I had mastered the exact tilt of the smile I'd need to offer everyone on my way out. Driving home, the echo chamber in my mind replayed it all. Alden's voice, Dexler's grin, my mother-in-law's quiet betrayal. I started to realize that the things I'd once dismissed as poor timing or lack of tact weren't accidents. They were signals. And I'd been ignoring every one of them. There's an old saying I remembered from a neighbor who'd once survived 2 divorces and a bankruptcy. You give someone an inch, and they take the whole yard, then sell it back to you at a markup. I'd been giving away inches for years. Smiles at jokes I didn't find funny, forgiveness I wasn't asked for, silence I hadn't agreed to. And what had I gotten in return? A performance? A brunch? A game plan about how I might react if my marriage ended over eggs and sausage links. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light flicked on automatically. No one had left it for me. Alden wasn't home. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A new message. Can you pick up wine for next weekend? Alden. I sat there for a beat, then opened a new note on my phone. The title came easy. Things they said when they thought I wasn't listening. First bullet. She'll cry if I serve her papers at brunch. I arrived at the charity gala 30 minutes before guests were scheduled to start arriving. That was the deal. I helped coordinate things, handled logistics, managed check-ins, quiet, invisible stuff that made the night look seamless. Isolde liked it that way. She smiled when others called her the face of the family. I was fine being the hands for a while. The community hall looked beautiful. Candlelit centerpieces flickered under soft amber lights. The name cards gleamed. I'd printed and placed each one myself, except mine. There wasn't one for me. That wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. As guests trickled in, I stood near the entrance, ticking off names, handing out programs. My mother floated around in a sequined dress, offering practiced hugs. When she took the mic to welcome everyone, she thanked the usual cast of characters: Isolde for inspiring the event, Dexler for securing the sponsors, and Alden for handling finances. She didn't mention me, not once. I smiled for the guests and kept my mouth shut. During the press photo call, I hovered on the edge of the ballroom, holding a clipboard. Isolde called for family to gather near the stage. Everyone assembled, positioning themselves in what looked like a magazine-ready tableau. I stepped forward, then paused. There was no room. No one looked my way. So I stepped back. I caught my own reflection in the mirror across the room. There I was, crooked posture, holding too much, saying nothing. The backstage crew in my own life story. You learn to step out before being told to. It saves you the humiliation. The dinner portion of the evening followed. Tables glowed under fairy lights, clinking forks, soft music. I found my seat at the far end. There were a few catering staff on either side, a cousin's date across from me. I looked around. My parents, Isolde, Dexler, and Alden were all grouped at the center table. Someone leaned over and asked, "Are you with the vendor team?" I didn't correct them. Later, Isolde glanced at me, caught my eye for a second, and offered a soft smile. That kind of smile you give when you've decided someone else can sit quietly and pretend they belong. I chewed my salad. I didn't taste a thing. At one point, Dexler stood to make a toast. He thanked everyone again, named names, cracked jokes. The crowd laughed. I sipped my water and nodded, like I was included, like I had a place here. But I was seated next to a staff member folding napkins. Driving home that night, the ache wasn't sharp anymore. It was dull, familiar. I remembered every childhood recital where no one clapped loudest for me. Every honor roll certificate Isolde framed, but mine ended up in a drawer. Every family photo where I held the camera instead of being in it. The worst kind of forgetting is the one that happens while you're still in the room. It took me years to see it, and less than a night to name it. Back home, I didn't pour wine or change clothes. I went straight to my desk, opened my laptop, and created a folder called Proof I Was There. Inside, I dragged every photo from the gala. The crowd, the table, my parents, my sister, my husband. Not one image had me in it, not even by accident. I opened a document and began typing. That's why they think I'll cry, because they've always treated me like I don't count. But this time, I wasn't going to disappear so easily. It started with an email from Isolde. Subject line, "Quick family finance chat, Saturday." The kind of casual phrasing that pretends not to be a summons. It came with a smiley face and a bullet point agenda attached. Alden never mentioned it. The message made it sound like an informal get-together, just some thoughts on shared generational wealth. But when I arrived at their home, the vibe was anything but casual. Dexler's office had been cleared for the event. Polished wood table, carafes of citrus water, leather folders neatly arranged. It wasn't a chat, it was a presentation. Isolde greeted me like a PR rep, with that smooth tilt of the head she reserved for public-facing kindness. "Lorene, glad you could make it." I didn't ask what it was really about. I knew better than to demand context from people who weaponize ambiguity. Alden was already seated, scrolling on his phone like he didn't know I was coming. When he finally looked up, he smiled just enough to keep things polite. Dexler dimmed the lights and pulled up a slideshow titled Stewardship for the Future. The first slide was a family tree. Photos, names, lines. Neat, intentional. My picture was there, but smaller. No caption. About 20 minutes in, Alden cleared his throat. "So, just to streamline things, I've moved our shared savings into a private trust," he said. "Keeps it cleaner for future planning." My stomach clenched, but I kept my tone even. "Which account?" "The Fidelity one," he said too quickly. "And a few others. It's all smart delegation." Dexler nodded like they were closing a merger. I waited. No one mentioned me being on any documentation, because I wasn't. I looked at Alden. "You moved our money without talking to me." "You always said I was better with finances," he said, shrugging. "You hate this stuff." I got up and left the room without raising my voice. Outside, I stood on their patio and breathed through my nose. The flowers smelled like expensive guilt. When I returned, the meeting had moved on to succession planning. Dexler clicked to a slide titled Legacy Allocation. It was clear. Assets, property, long-term investments. A chunk of the trust was already earmarked for Isolde's son. My name wasn't on any line. Isolde looked directly at me, then said to the room, "Some roots grow straighter than others." That line didn't just land. It split something inside me. Still, I said nothing. Just folded my hands in my lap while every version of myself that had ever asked to belong quietly died. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I just texted Jenny. "Remember that lawyer you mentioned?" She replied within 2 minutes. "Always." I spent the next hour downloading every email, attachment, and account change notice into a private folder, copied the lot to a flash drive, labeled it in red ink, "What they think I don't know." I read an old quote once. "When they stop seeing your value, don't ask them. Show them what they lost." And then I found it, purely by chance. I went back to Dexler's office, claiming I'd forgotten my scarf. The printer was humming. A document still sat on the tray. Succession outline, Isolde's line. I read it slowly. My name was at the bottom. Next to it, Lorene. Not critical. I took a picture, folded the page, and put it back exactly where I'd found it. As I stepped out into the hallway, I smiled. Not big. Just enough to feel it on the inside of my cheek. They didn't know it yet, but that line was the last time I let them decide where I stood. The windows were open, letting in the warm May air, and I was trying to declutter my desktop. Not for spring cleaning, but because I needed to do something that didn't involve watching Alden sleep beside me like nothing was shifting under us. I clicked through old folders, renaming files, archiving projects I'd long stopped caring about. And then I saw it. A forwarded email. From Dexler to Alden. I wouldn't have noticed it if the subject line hadn't made my stomach turn. Plan B. I opened it. The thread wasn't long. Just 3 messages back and forth. Short, dry, coded. But it didn't take much to read between the lines. There was a transfer, a trust. Isolde listed as trustee. And then the final line from Dexler. "She'll never see it coming. Let her sign first." I stared at it. Once. Twice. Then I took a screenshot and saved it to a new folder on my private cloud drive labeled Contingencies. After that, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even sit down. I just stood there in the middle of the living room, breathing shallowly. That was the moment I realized something in me had crossed over. This wasn't confusion anymore. This wasn't hurt. It was something colder, more calculating. I minimized the window and kept digging, half looking, half daring the universe to show me more. And it did. Buried in a hard drive I hadn't opened in years, one Alden had labeled Media Backup. I found our wedding video. We hadn't watched it since the year we got married. He used to say it was too long, that he hated watching himself on camera. I always assumed it was self-consciousness. I clicked play. The footage was as awkward as I remembered. My dress a little wrinkled, the audio clipping in places, the lighting too harsh in the reception hall. But at around minute 42, I heard it. Not from the mic, but from the camcorder's ambient pickup near the bar. Dexler's voice. "Just hang in there till it's legally smart to exit. Alden laughed. I rewound it and played it again. This time, I listened without flinching. Then I smiled. Not out of shock, not out of sadness, but because in that moment, I knew they thought they were clever. They thought I was slow, emotional, predictable. They didn't know I'd been learning. At dinner that night, I set the table like normal. Poured a glass of red for Alden, roasted chicken and asparagus, his favorite. As he chewed, I brought up a word casually. So, trust. It's such a funny concept. His fork paused mid-air. Sorry? He said, tone neutral, but eyes not. I was just thinking, I said lightly. How much of our life runs on trust? Money, marriage, passwords. He forced a chuckle. Well, I'd say we've built a pretty solid one. I nodded. Sure. Then I sipped my wine and didn't say anything else. Let silence settle like a trap with the spring already wound. Later, while he watched TV, I transferred the video file, the email thread, and screenshots to Jenny's encrypted drive. Do you still have that burner drive? I texted her. Always, she replied. In my planner, I wrote one sentence. The next time they bet on my tears, they better factor in fire. At 11:37 p.m., my Dropbox app pinged. File accessed from unknown device. I sat up in bed. Waited. 3 minutes later, my phone lit up. Alden, why were you in our wedding video files tonight? I stared at the message. Then, with a calm I didn't fake, I typed back. Me. Why were you in a folder labeled Plan B? I waited. He didn't reply. That silence told me everything I needed to know. The moment I stepped through the door, I felt it. The pause. Too short to be called silence, but long enough to notice. Conversations dipped just below the surface. A glance here, a whisper there. It was Dexler and Isolde's turn to host, and they had pulled out all the stops. Crystal stemware, seating cards with calligraphy, floral arrangements too symmetrical to be spontaneous. I was seated between my mother and a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Alden greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that felt colder than the champagne. You look lovely, he said, placing his hand briefly on my back before disappearing to refill a wine glass that wasn't mine. The table shimmered with candlelight and curated intentions. The tension clung to the linen napkins. They were waiting for something. As dessert was being plated, Alden tapped the side of his wine glass with the back of his knife. The room hushed in a way no one asked for. It simply knew. I have something for Lorene, he said, voice smooth, practiced. A few heads turned. My father shifted in his chair. Alden reached into his blazer and pulled out a plain white envelope. He placed it in front of me like a menu. Figured now was as good a time as any, he said with a smile that didn't belong to the man I married. The envelope was unsealed. Inside, divorce papers, already signed, backdated, filed. I read the first page slowly. I didn't blink. He had even highlighted a paragraph, like I might miss it otherwise. No one spoke, not even Dexler, who usually filled silence like it was a stage. I looked up at Alden, smiled just as sweetly, and said, "Thank you." Then I reached into my purse. I pulled out a gold-wrapped box, small and sleek, tied with black satin, placed it neatly in front of him. His brow creased. "What's this?" "Your real gift," I said. He hesitated, then unwrapped it in front of everyone. Inside, a leather folder. He opened it. The moment his eyes caught the first page, the color left his face like air from a balloon. Dexler leaned over to read. His jaw tightened. It was a notarized copy of our prenup, the one Alden drunkenly signed and forgot, the one Jenny helped me amend, the one that ensured I would walk away with everything he assumed I'd never dare to claim. Underneath that, a time-stamped statement of claim, filed the day after he moved the savings out of our account. "What? What is this?" he muttered. "It's a copy of something you forgot you gave me," I said gently. "Legally binding. Effective immediately." No tears, no voice raised, just a fact, a statement, proof. My mother blinked rapidly. My father looked down at his plate. Isolde opened her mouth, then closed it again. I took a sip of wine. The cinnamon on the roast duck lingered in the air. My hands didn't shake. I was never afraid of ending this, I said to no one in particular. I was afraid I'd forget who I was. The room stayed still. Then, under the table, my phone buzzed. It was from Jenny. Step 2, ready when you are. I glanced at Alden once more. He was still staring at the folder like it might change if he stared hard enough. I slipped my wedding ring off under the table, placed it in my palm, closed my fist. No one even noticed. That's how quiet freedom starts. By Monday morning, Alden had somehow become husband of the year. He was offering to pick up dry cleaning, texted me a link to an Italian restaurant he thought we should try, and even bought flowers, gas station tulips. But still, I didn't react. I'd already sent Jenny the follow-up file. At breakfast, Dexler joined us at the table, like nothing had happened. He poured himself orange juice, complimented my earrings, and asked about my garden, which he'd never seen. Isolde kept smiling, but her jaw was tight. Her hands didn't stop fidgeting with the linen napkin on her lap. And Alden? He kept glancing at his phone like it might save him. They were pretending the fire alarm was a joke, but I'd already poured gasoline. The next day, it came by accident. An email. Subject: mitigation plan, if she goes public. It was a thread between Dexler's PR consultant and Alden, drafted messages, reputation strategies, spin. One problem: a junior assistant had CC'd me, probably muscle memory from a shared press list. I opened it and read every word. We believe Laureen is experiencing emotional turbulence. Her grief may be clouding her judgment. We were helping her, financially and structurally. We acted in her best interest. Disgust didn't even scratch the surface of what I felt. I didn't forward the email. I didn't reply. I saved it. Then printed 3 copies. One for Jenny, one for the press, if I chose, and one for myself, which I folded and placed into the same gold box I'd handed Alden the night of the dinner. That afternoon, I walked into Jenny's office without knocking. She took one look at my face and closed her laptop. I handed her the folder. Add this. Encrypted. Ready. She asked, "Want to hit the financials now?" "Not yet," I said. "Let them wonder which hole it's leaking from." I left her office and drove straight to Nordstrom. Bought the red dress Alden once said made me look like I was trying too hard. He'd hated it because it didn't shrink me. That Saturday was the annual charity brunch for Dexler's foundation. It was the kind of event where everyone in attendance thought they were important just because they got a name tag. I didn't say a word when I arrived, just walked in, heels clicking, lips lined in crimson, hair slicked back. Heads turned. I knew what they were whispering. Why is she here? Alden stood stiffly near the bar. Dexler was already pacing, whispering into his phone like he'd misplaced something important. Probably control. I let them watch me cross the room. I smiled once, at a woman I didn't know, just to show I remembered how. No one approached me. That was the tell. Later that night, back home, I kicked off my heels and poured a glass of water. My phone pinged once. It was from Jenny. The message was simple. "Burner inbox got a hit. You'll want to see this." Attached was a forwarded message from an anonymous corporate account, likely a mid-tier exec inside Dexler's firm. "You didn't get this from me," it said, "but you'll want to look at file Zeta." I downloaded the attachment, opened it. It was a set of internal financial logs, a hidden line item called Side Diversion, LW. My initials, my name, my money. They hadn't just planned to erase me. They'd already started. I didn't blink. That file wasn't just a mistake, it was the thread. And I was about to pull. I arrived 10 minutes early. That was deliberate. The boardroom was colder than I expected. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking downtown Sacramento. A long, lacquered table that looked more ceremonial than functional. I took the seat at the far end, facing the door. Hair up, blazer crisp, lipstick matte. Not for effect, for control. Alden walked in second, tugging at the collar of a shirt that probably fit better before the last few weeks. He looked at me, but I didn't offer anything back, not even a blink. Dexler came in third, flanked by his attorney, a woman with a leather briefcase and a blank stare that said she'd seen worse. Isolde trailed behind, eyes darting to everything except me. They brought suits to a war I'd been rehearsing in silence. When everyone was seated, the mediator gave his usual spiel. Ground rules, neutrality, confidentiality. None of it mattered. We weren't there for negotiation. We were there for the unveiling. I opened my folder and slid a document across the table to Alden's lawyer. "You'll want to start with this," I said. He read the first line, then blinked. "This is the deed to the house?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Signed by your client. A year ago. Notarized. Witnessed. Filed." Alden leaned forward. "That was—" "You were drunk," I interrupted. "And not paying attention. That's when people like you get the most generous." The lawyer coughed. "This complicates things." Dexler muttered something under his breath, and Alden's face flushed pink. "You were trying to sell property that's not yours," I added, folding my hands. The silence that followed was heavier than the air. Then came part two. I pulled out a small Bluetooth speaker, pressed play. The audio was clear, unmistakable. Dexler's voice from his office, days before the dinner. "The only thing she has is faith," he said, chuckling, "and you're about to bankrupt that too." The file ended. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. I sipped water. "Any rebuttal?" the mediator asked awkwardly. No one spoke. Alden reached for a stack of documents like they might help. I placed my hand over them. "Don't," I said. "You'll smudge the ink. It's already legal." Dexler's lawyer requested a recess. I declined. "You can't pause justice when it's been simmering this long," I said. No one argued. The meeting dissolved slowly. One by one, they stood, gathered their papers, straightened ties, pretended not to look at me. As they shuffled out, a paralegal walked over and handed me a manila envelope labeled confidential. Inside were printed logs, bank transfers, flagged entries. Each one bore Dexler's name. Each one used Alden's financial code. Each one tagged with my initials. I didn't flinch. Didn't scan past the first page. I closed the envelope. "Step 3 starts now," I said. The doors to the conference center swung open at 7:45 a.m. sharp. I was the first one through. I liked it that way, arriving before the noise, before the makeup of the day settled over people's real intentions. I checked the registration folders on the long folding table and confirmed my speaking slot at 11:15 a.m. Panel 2. Women Building Wealth, Public and Private. The volunteer at check-in, a young woman with a bright smile and a clipboard, handed me my badge without looking up. It read, Logistics Coordinator, Lauren Whitfield. I stared at it. "It's Lorene," I said evenly, tapping the badge once with my index finger. "And I'm the co-founder of this program." She blinked, flushed, then apologized. The kind that sounds like a software error, not a mistake of memory. I didn't correct her again. I just peeled the label off and stuck it to the bottom of my bag. I'd stopped expecting recognition. Now I just documented its absence. The air in the conference hall was familiar, caffeinated, productive, performative. My name was printed in the opening slides, but not in the welcome remarks. I wasn't surprised. By 10 a.m., the crowd had thickened. I spotted Marley across the room, hovering near a display table. We'd built this program together, back when we still believed mentorship wasn't a branding tool. She saw me, paused, then turned, busied herself with a stack of tote bags. I found her near the coffee station half an hour later. "You're avoiding me," I said. She looked around, like someone might overhear. "It's complicated, Lauren." "No, it's actually very clear," she sighed. "Dexler's firm funds half my department. I can't take sides." I smiled without warmth. "You just did." She didn't argue. She didn't apologize either. Back in the main hall, another speaker took the stage. Someone I'd mentored. Someone who once sat across from me, trembling before her first board pitch. She spoke passionately, articulately, quoted ideas I'd written in a grant proposal 2 years ago. The crowd clapped, loud, enthusiastic. She never mentioned my name. I sat in the third row, didn't stand, didn't clap. I wasn't bitter, I was finished. Let them clap for ghosts. I'm done haunting myself for them. After the session ended, I stepped into the green room. It was quiet, cool. A carafe of lukewarm coffee sat half-drunk on a tray. I pulled out my note cards, looked at them one last time, then deleted the digital version from my phone. Instead, I opened a new document. Title: This is how I rebuild. First line I typed, sometimes the microphone you need is the one you hand yourself. Then I shut my laptop. As I was packing my things, my phone buzzed. An email from a name I hadn't seen in months, Marcy, a former assistant at Dexler's firm. She'd left abruptly last winter, no explanation. The subject line: They're making moves again. The body was short. Just thought you should know. Attached is something I found while cleaning out my old drives. You didn't sign this, did you? There was a single attachment. PDF. I opened it. A power of attorney document. My name, in signature font. Except it wasn't mine. Dexler's name was on the authorization line, Alden's financial code in the metadata. I stared at it, the way one might stare at a spider in a glass. Fascinated, disgusted, impressed by its precision. So that's the game they want to play now, I said aloud. They thought silence meant surrender. But I was only quiet because I was sharpening every word. By the end of June, Dexler's face had vanished from every banner, brochure, and webpage tied to his company. The media release blamed a strategic restructuring, but no one missed the quiet truth humming underneath. The audit had landed. Subpoenas had been served. And though no one said my name publicly, I recognized the architecture of consequence, because I'd helped build it. I never celebrated the collapse. I simply exhaled. That was enough. A few days after the news broke, I heard a knock on my apartment door. It wasn't the kind of knock meant to intimidate. It was hesitant, a rhythm I hadn't heard in years. I opened the door to find my father holding a dusty scrapbook. I didn't call because I wasn't sure you'd answer, he said, eyes not quite meeting mine. I stepped aside. He entered like a man trying not to make the floor creak. We sat in silence for a few minutes before he spoke. I didn't see what they were doing to you. Not clearly. That's on me. He didn't offer excuses, didn't say he was misled. He just placed the scrapbook on my coffee table, pages worn from time, photos half peeled at the corners. I kept thinking you were strong enough to take care of yourself, he added. I looked at him. I was. That didn't mean I deserved to. He nodded. There were no tears. Just that strange weight when someone finally says the thing you stopped hoping to hear. Thanks for seeing it now, I said. He stayed for 20 more minutes. We didn't talk about Alden, or Dexler, or Isolde. Just about the roses blooming late this season. Then he left. Quietly. But different. 2 days later, I drove to the house I'd once shared with Alden. It was mostly empty now. Furniture gone, walls stripped bare. The echo of my own footsteps followed me from room to room. I didn't linger. I'd come only to leave something behind. On the dining table, I placed an envelope. Inside was a single handwritten page. This house held my silence for years. Now it echoes with yours. Keep it. I walked out without looking back. That night, Alden called 3 times. I didn't pick up. The 4th time, I muted the ringer completely. Isolde texted once. I didn't know it would go this far. I responded, You didn't think I'd go this far. No reply. The silence felt earned. The next afternoon, Jenny called. Her tone wasn't rushed, but steady, purposeful. You'll want to read this, she said. Transcript just hit my desk. It was a court filing. Dexler had testified under oath in one of the early depositions. In an attempt to minimize blame, he admitted to transferring funds using a forged document, mine, claimed it had been an internal error, blamed legal assistance. But it was too late. The words were on record. He buried the knife and forgot I watched him dig. I closed the file. The next step wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about momentum. Forgiveness was never part of the plan. But consequences? Those were guaranteed. I woke up before the alarm. Not out of restlessness, but because the apartment was quiet. Truly quiet. No vibrating phone. No tension waiting in the inbox. The only sounds were the birds from the tree just outside my window and the subtle creak of floorboards beneath bare feet. I didn't check my email. I didn't scroll. I brewed my coffee, sat on the couch, and just existed. It's strange how loud silence can feel when you've spent years translating chaos. When they stopped talking about me, it got quieter. That's when I realized the noise had never belonged to me. Later that morning, I sat at my kitchen counter and opened my journal. Instead of writing, I opened a new document on my laptop. At the top of the page, I typed, "Dear Alden," then paused. This letter wasn't for him, not really. It was for me. You didn't break me. You paused me. I'm back now. You mistook my stillness for weakness. But all it ever meant was, I was listening harder than you thought. You built a stage for your betrayal. I built a file for mine. You rehearsed your exit. I choreographed your removal. I didn't print it. I didn't sign it. I didn't even save it. I burned it. I tore the page from my notebook, lit the match over the sink, and let it curl into itself, ash drifting down like a soft ending. Not dramatic, just final. Around noon, I walked downtown and sat outside the same restaurant where Alden and I once celebrated our 5th anniversary. That night, he'd ordered the most expensive wine on the list and said he'd always protect what we'd built. I believed him. This time, I sat alone. The hostess asked if I was waiting on anyone. No, I smiled. I've already arrived. The steak was better than I remembered. The server didn't ask again. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. I glanced down at the screen. Isolde. I let it ring. She didn't leave a voicemail. Instead, I turned on music. Old jazz. The kind Alden said always felt like background noise. I sat with it turned up just enough to drown out the temptation to remember. Forgiveness is overrated when you no longer need to remember. That evening, as the sky folded into dusk and the air shifted from heat to warmth, an email pinged into my inbox. The subject line read, Women and Wealth Forum, Keynote Invitation. I clicked it open. They wanted me to speak. Not just as a guest, as the closing act. Topic, Strategic Self-Preservation, When Trust is Weaponized. I stared at the subject line for a long moment. Then I shut the laptop slowly, walked to the mirror by my entryway, and looked myself in the eye. Let's begin again. The auditorium was cold in the way all high-ceilinged venues are, formality chilling the air before the people arrive. I stood backstage, fingers calm, voice steady. My name glowed on the digital screen behind the podium. Lorene Whitfield, survivor, strategist, sovereign. There were over 200 women in the room. Lawyers, investors, CEOs, first-time founders. Media outlets lined the back wall. I walked to the mic, not quickly, not timidly, just like I'd rehearsed it in my head every night for the past year. They said I'd cry. I chose to speak instead. I didn't start with a joke. I didn't thank the crowd for being here. I looked out, met the eyes that looked ready to be challenged, and began. There's a type of erasure that doesn't come with violence. It comes with politeness, with words like, for your protection, and we've got it handled. I know because I lived in it. I paid the mortgage on it, and I hosted holidays inside it. No one moved. They built systems to erase me. I took notes. My voice didn't waver. I told the story not with names, but with facts. Not with rage, but with evidence. Financial betrayal disguised as planning. Emotional sabotage dressed in loyalty. Legal traps laid behind dinner table smiles. and the room leaned forward. When I paused, they didn't clap. They held their breath. I was told that silence was dignity, that not making a scene was strength. But what if the silence is the scene? What if our silence is what they're betting on? Midway through the talk, I reached into my blazer and handed the moderator a flash drive. These documents are now public record, not for revenge, for anyone who's ever wondered if their gut was exaggerating. The screen behind me lit up, not with faces, but with evidence. Transaction logs, internal emails, scanned court documents, legal timestamps, signatures, my initials, real and forged. Gasps followed, then a pause so long it became a verdict. You don't need fire to burn them down, I said in closing, just light. When I stepped down from the podium, the applause didn't erupt. It built, like a wave cresting, slow and deliberate. Some stood, one woman cried, another recorded on her phone with trembling hands. Later that night, Alden's firm issued a brief, sterile statement. All financial partnerships are currently under internal review. Dexler's photo vanished from the company's leadership page. Isolde's social media went private. I didn't repost. I didn't comment. I watched it all unfold like weather I had predicted. As I walked through the lobby of the conference center, heels echoing under the vaulted ceiling, a woman stopped me near the elevator. She looked maybe 30, hands tight around a recycled canvas bag. I almost married someone like him, she said. I didn't. Because of you. I didn't say anything right away, just nodded, gently, fully. Then I stepped into the elevator. They bet I'd be broken. What they didn't know? I was just getting started. Some stories don't end with fireworks. They end with a steady voice, a clear mind, and a woman who finally knows her worth. I didn't scream. I didn't chase apologies. I chose something quieter, but stronger. Clarity. And that clarity taught me something I hope you carry with you today. You do not have to wait for someone else to name your value. You define it, protect it, and if necessary, prove it. If you're in a place where the silence feels too loud, where you've been written out of your own life, remember this. Your absence in their recognition doesn't erase your presence in the truth. And sometimes, your best revenge is building a life they can no longer touch. So, let me ask you, have you ever been underestimated and rose anyway? Have you stayed quiet when you should have spoken? Or maybe, did your silence speak louder than anything you could have said? If this story resonated with you, if you felt even a sliver of your own experience reflected here, let me know. Drop a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if this video challenged you or made you feel something unexpected, I'd love to hear your side too. Every story matters. And hey, if you'd like to hear more stories of strength, strategy, and self-worth, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that button so you don't miss the next one, because we're just getting started.